So if the senator and Dr. Thornberg would join me on stage.
Should I come up?
Yeah. Excellent.
Oh, wow.
Hot mic. Yeah.
Let there be light.
All right, we're going to get started on this third panel. And this, of all the four panels that we're doing, is going to be the most both California-focused and rebuilding and revitalizing focused. Obviously, our first couple panels have been grounded in the documentary Gotham, which, again, I highly recommend. Just a terrific film that's available on Amazon Prime and other streaming services. But at the same time, speaking with Michelle, we thought that it would be good to take one panel and really focus it on the rebuilding and vitalizing effort that is underway here in light of the fires that I know all of you have been impacted by. And I'm delighted to be joined by my friend Ben Allen, who's the state senator for the 24th Senate District, the state senator in this area, and Chris Thornberg, who is the founding partner of a firm called Beacon Economics. But of note, he has recently joined the School of Public Policy as a research fellow.
Cool.
And we're delighted to be working and partnering together on a series of research papers. The next one due out, by the way, is going to be on the impact, the economic impact of the closure of PCH and the fires on Malibu businesses. And so stay tuned for that release. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. So, Senator, let's begin. I wanted to just bring everyone into, to the degree it's possible, the sense of what it's like to be a leader of an area that has gone through a historic catastrophe. And I wondered first we could just begin on a more personal note. If you could take us back to those days in early January when the news began to break, and what your life was like in the midst of all that.
Yeah. Well, so I had gone up to Sacramento for my very first day back in session, January 6th. It was the Monday. And I'd actually written the resolution that had called for the president to create these national monuments in the desert and up in Northern California. And so they say, hey, the President Biden's coming to the desert. He's going to announce these national monuments. We're going to be on a plane at 7 in the morning. You got to get up at 5 a.m. the next day. And we're going to go down to Ontario and go out to the desert. Okay. You know, so I literally just leave a bunch of my stuff at my house. I leave the place. We get on this plane. We start driving out past Indio, and with a whole bunch of a small group of senators, we're going to see President Biden and be there as part of the celebration. The winds are starting to pick up, and then all of a sudden they cancel the president's landing because the winds are too bad and the dust is flowing so badly. So we double back to Ontario. We miss a flight. And then I start getting reports of something very serious happening in Palisades. And so they dropped me off at Rancho Cucamonga Metrolink station. And I took the train in. And as I went along, I was just spent my whole time pouring through all the information I could. And by the time I got home, I ended up staying at home for the next 3 weeks because my entire life became totally consumed by the fire. I'm from Santa Monica. I spent so much of my childhood in the Palisades. Our synagogue's in the Palisades. I have so many friends there. And it's been a very difficult experience. So many friends have lost their homes. Just also explaining to my little 6-year-old what was happening. The fire, we could see it right from our window. We had to evacuate my mother. She took in someone from her community to go stay with her for a little while once her community, her neighborhood became safe. And then it just became this really drinking from a proverbial fire hose, trying to just learn the process of how is it that the federal government shows up and provides support, what the whole infrastructure that that the state provides, how we coordinate with the locals, the whole disaster recovery center operation, the Red Cross and FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers and the California Office of Emergency Services, all of the dysfunction of Southern California governance and how that interplayed in all sorts of bad ways in terms of our ability to push back. And then of course, just giving hugs to people, and including my poor staff that had just finished several months of us being out of session, so they were doing all the work with me, just getting to know the district, being around the district, and then all of a sudden they went into consolers in chief mode, and they were just handling thousands of calls from people desperate, trying to figure out how to navigate, what to do, how to handle this new massive change in their lives. Yeah. And we had to learn very quickly all of the processes about applying for FEMA aid and how do you get small business loans, and there's this whole kind of infrastructure of government support that's imperfect but there.
Yeah.
And part of our challenge involved just learning as quickly as we possibly could so that we could be quick disseminators of good, high quality information that was really helpful to people as they were seeing their life flash before their eyes. And doing all that while also managing 2 little ones and my wife, our family, and all the stress associated. So it was a very difficult first month. All my colleagues, of course, up in Sacramento, for whom they all cared, yeah. but the horror of it was it was a little far for them.
Yeah,
I've never been so close to such a massive global disaster. And so there was all this. I was on international media. Friends were seeing me in Spain, and then of course then the attention goes away. Right? There's all this interest and so much focus, and then they moved on to the next thing. Donald Trump's tariffs and the market. What the latest thing. Yeah. And so that's the other challenge too. How do I, as the guy who happens to represent this area, keep beating the drum? Also keep myself informed as I start getting sucked back into the grind and the routine of the budget and all the challenges in Sacramento, to make sure that my community continues to get the priorities that it deserves, while also recognizing that I got a lot of other people in my district who don't live in the Palisades and they need help too, and they've been impacted too. Even though they haven't lost their houses, it's impacted our economy and our region in all sorts of ways. So it's been a rough couple months, but a meaningful. Yeah. A meaningful couple months, because we have, it's been a real opportunity for public service in its most unglamorous and important way.
Well, I want to come back to just some of the next steps after that you experienced after the fires. But Chris, I want to bring you in, and this is all still raw. It's still happening. PCH is still closed. We're still trying to, frankly, put our arms around what has happened. Yeah. But take us into the mind of an economist, to the degree any of us wants to be in that mind. Take us into the mind of an economist.
Dismal science.
And but just when, I was about to say when a catastrophe like this happens, but we haven't had a catastrophe like this. But when you work around the country, and obviously you've researched in areas where there have been natural disasters and so forth, what are the kind of signals that you're looking at as it relates to the impact on an economy by a massive disaster?
Let me back up, because what's interesting about this question is actually, I came back to LA in 2000, and I started working at UCLA, working in the UCLA forecast. And I remember one of the first projects I was handed was basically on September 12th, 2001. And I was asked, what does this mean for our economy? Yeah. And of course, that was the first natural disaster I had to deal with. And we're talking obviously the 3,000 deaths and the closures and all that horrific situation. Talking about New York as the case may be. Yeah. And since that point in time, I have looked at these episodes, and look, as tragic as they are in the short run. I mean, this was tragic. With 12,000 households lost everything, which is just a shocking number, right? But we also know that if you look at past disasters, when the right support, the right information, when the government's doing the right thing, when the community comes together, the economy comes back very rapidly. But again, that depends on how it's handled, right? I mean, that is a critical aspect of these things. indeed, in the context of this, we have been studying this. We've done some work with the EOI group, who has been working with the mayor's office and building that. We're doing some work for you. There's some other elements we're studying right now. But one of the things I thought about is, look, if you really want to see how this thing can shake out, let's go look at other episodes. And there are plenty of episodes. I mean, one of the things here is, right off the bat, California needs to have some permanent recovery systems in play, because the worst year for fires ever was 2017. Well, that was until 2018. That was the worst ever until 2020. And, you know, I think it's fair to say at the rate we're going here, 2025 will probably eclipse that. So let's acknowledge this is now part of California. It is not something we can ignore, and we need to have permanent systems in place to start thinking about how to dealing with it. And that permanence is both in terms of being ready to deal with it, having codes in place to harden ourselves, but also understanding what needs to happen afterwards.
Right.
Ben, you shouldn't have to have had run around figuring this out. This stuff should have been prepared. This fire should have happened, and one of your staff should have walked in and go, here's the manual. Because at this point in time, we should know that. And I would tell you, one of the things also, just thinking about what happens now, there are plenty of case studies inside California. And we can get into this later, but I can tell you, like, you want to know everything going right, look at Sonoma in 2017. You want to see everything go wrong, look at Paradise in 2018.
Yeah.
Because these are side-by-sides of everything you can do right and everything you can do wrong in the context of this kind of disaster to help these communities rebuild. And I'm still not sure which way we're going, to be perfectly honest with you. I am still on the fence. Are we going to go Sonoma? Are we going to go Paradise? I don't know.
Well, and before coming back to the senator, were there policy decisions made in Paradise versus Sonoma that you would touch on as being pivotal?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very simple. Yeah, I don't know if you knew this. I don't want to shock anybody, but it turns out we have a housing shortage in California. And when you look at that housing shortage, you realize that that has been driven by 1,000 cuts, so to speak, right? Inefficient bureaucracies, cumbersome regulations, high permit costs, a government that seems extremely uninterested in the successful outcome of your effort. And all of these things have become a blockage on the artery of housing that our economy relies on. I hope I wasn't being too dramatic there, but.
It's a good metaphor.
And what Sonoma did was clear the arteries. Yeah. They got out of the way. They streamlined the process. They guaranteed results. They said, we will answer you in weeks. They organized the communities. They cleared stuff out. And what you see is not only did they have a remarkably rapid recovery process, the coffee neighborhood has got to be one of the most amazing stories ever. But today, post-fire, they have over twice as many annual permits as they had before the fires. So they learned their lessons. There was a silver lining to this gray cloud, which is if you figure out how to do this, for this, it turns out it's good for lots of things.
Right.
None of that happened in Paradise. None of it. I have not seen the city of LA have a serious conversation about this yet. There were some brief flirtations with, we're going to streamline this, and then it went away. Or we're going to have these two processes happen at the same time, and then it went away. And I'm not seeing the kind of leadership necessary to figure this one out, and that's going to be the primary problem. Look, let me compare real quick. Sonoma, Los Angeles, they lost 5,000 housing units. We lost 12,000. That said, that's a population of 600,000. We're a population of 9.8 million. So proportionately, what happened up there was worse. So this is not something we don't have the physical capacity to deal with. We absolutely do. LA, Orange County regularly permit 25,000 to 30,000 permits per year. This is 12,000. This is not a big lift, but it's a function of opening up the gateways to allow people to go ahead and do this. Instead, you're watching the narrative yank this yet again into conversations about inequality and in conversations about exploiter and exploited. I'm just thinking of the mayor, or the governor saying, oh, nobody should be able to call these people and make them an offer on their land. And I'm like, why is this part of the conversation here.
Right.
Why is this part of the conversation?
Well, Senator, let's come back to you because there's also different governance structures thinking about what happened up in Sonoma. In some ways, we're talking city and county. Here, we're talking city and county, federal involvement. The county's much more involved in Altadena. The city's much more involved in what happened in the Palisades. What is it? First, let me say, how do you think things are going? And that's not at all a coy or leading question. And related to that, are the things that either are or aren't working, are they structural in how our government, I mean, do we have a resilient governance structure to deal with that? Or are they more, say, funding related, political, or even individual?
I think there's the answer is it's a complicated mix to both those questions. How's it going? I mean, there's some things that have been really impressive.
Yeah.
The cleanup has been faster than anything of this size or scale around the country. I actually think the federal government gets a lot of the credit for that. Both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, is totally different and wildly different as they are. They were both very committed to a quick response. It was something that was a priority for President Trump, and you're seeing the benefits of that. I think you're already starting to see some permits given out in the Palisades. There were a lot of predictions that this was going to take a lot longer, the basic kind of start to the cleanup process. And so I think President Trump gets a lot of credit, quite frankly, for leading that and being pretty aggressive about sending the message down to FEMA and Army Corps to cooperate and work really closely with our folks and just do the work in the National Guard, et cetera. Now, I will also say that he's complicated things immensely through, by creating all sorts of ambiguities about whether we get reimbursed, what will be reimbursed, what kinds of things will be financed. I'm really glad to see a bipartisan coalition of Democrat and Republican members of Congress. Every single member of Congress from California wrote a letter to the president asking for federal aid without conditions. So that's a really positive thing. And so I'm hopeful that will lead to some just a strong, continued, robust financial commitment from the federal government, which is really an essential player in this when it comes down to it. I mean, the state is just not prepared to handle a crisis of this size without massive federal support. Now, your other question is so there's some good stories here. Clearly, the mayor's been struggling. This was just, I think we're all surprised, quite frankly, by the extent to which they've struggled.
How would you define the struggles? Are these struggles of decision-making, communicating, convening? How would you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I think, right from the beginning, right, the inability to answer that question from that reporter that was yelling at her when she got on the airplane. I think everyone would have forgiven her in a second for being out of the country. I mean, nobody complained when she went to Paris to take the Olympic flag. People expect the mayor to travel from time to time.
Right.
The mayor of one of the biggest cities in the world that's about to host the Olympics, it's not an inappropriate thing to travel on occasion. But you have to own the facts of the matter and say, the second I heard there was a problem, I got on the first plane back. I've been in constant contact with the leadership, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we're fighting this fire with everything we got. And so there's been struggle there, and then I think we've also seen just the dysfunction of our total governance structure. The mayor doesn't have as much power as the mayor of New York, for example. Then you've got this overlay of the county, which is a whole nother complexity that they don't have to deal with in New York. So that's been on full display. Of course, the disaster crossed jurisdictional lines. It came to Malibu. It's in an unincorporated territory. It's the city of Los Angeles. Then you got the Altadena crisis. So all those things have really, I think for me, pointed out a lot of these governance dysfunctions that we have as a region that many scholars have written about over the years, and they've just been on full display for everyone because people want the system to work well. And that being said, There's a lot of good work underway. I mean, some of you will be able to drive. You'll get to see. They're working. They're cleaning this place up. The permits are starting. There's some small rebuilding happening. There's philanthropy stepped up in a major way. You've got they're on track, but it's been messier than it should have been.
Chris, the series that we're working on together is called Alternative Viewpoints in California Policy, and you've written and we've talked about some of the things that people might not know about the impact of the fires, the scale and scope of that impact. What do you think when most Californians read the news about the massive loss of homes and property? When we've talked about the true impact, I know that you've written about the fact that actually some of the value in the dirt itself is not always fully understood. So talk a little bit about really some of the value still remains here.
Well, absolutely. Well, I mean, look, some of the numbers about the cost of this disaster have been so preposterously overblown. I one school on the west side that will remain unknown, even though it's my alma mater, had some obnoxious number like $200 billion or something like that. And a lot of this is misunderstanding because remember, the value of the dirt's still there. When you look at a property in Palisades, the value is the dirt. It's the neighborhood. It's not the structure.
6 inches below.
It's 6 inches below. Yeah. And so, that being said, the numbers are probably in the $25 billion to $30 billion range. You throw in some infrastructure, you're probably in the mid-30s. You got to throw property damage and stuff. So the numbers are relatively there. Here's another surprise, and this again, I always feel like somehow or other in our world and here in Los Angeles, the politics have gotten so sharp that almost every sort of transaction is looked at as in a negative way. And I remember LA Times had their big outing article for any landlord who might be evil enough to raise their rent in the face of this tragedy. And I remember looking at Sonoma and not seeing any kind of real shock to the cost of housing despite all the displacement of people. And I remarked on this. Everybody's like, oh, it's going to be tragic. Rates are going to go up. But when you look a little closer, what you find is, again, it goes back to the generosity of the community. The fire hits, there's this massive displacement, and actually, there's always a lot of vacant housing out there. People hold it off the market. Well, they stop holding it off the market when a tragedy hits. And it's nice to see a community lean in. And actually, what's amazing is how these people have been displaced, but the communities around have actually taken those families in. And again, it goes back to the idea that we need to stop looking for we don't need to constantly be looking for a good and a bad in every single transaction between people.
Yeah.
Let's get the community to work together on this because you could see that happening here. Another thing I've been really frustrated at has been, for example, some of the restrictions that they've wanted to place on people being able to sell this land. And that, yet again, I think is a horrible idea. Look, if you have kids, you don't have time to rebuild. If you're retired, you don't have time to rebuild. If you're a normal human being who's never built a house, you don't want to rebuild. Okay? Because development is ugly. It's hard. It is so hard to do this stuff. And this idea that somehow or other we're going to let these people rebuild or make them rebuild this. No. I think that we have to acknowledge that the disaster is here. These communities are going to reform in something different, and we need to acknowledge that. And the people who do want to get out of there, we should help them. Sell your property for the top dollar to a developer who's going to come in and put up a big, beautiful home. And by the way, the value of that big, beautiful home is, did anybody mention the $1 billion deficit our city's facing?
Right.
And the easiest way for us to get out of the hole is to build housing because it creates property taxes. And it gives us more money, and it drives more business and taxable sales and all the other stuff. So, for me, I want us to take a step back and take a community approach. And I just the narrative keeps taking us to this idea that everything's got to be, exploiter and exploited.
Right.
When I think we can look at this and understand that the community is pulling together for these folks.
Senator, another layer into this very complex situation, one that's much more focused on Sacramento, is the insurance issue. And I've said publicly that our insurance commissioner has had a bright spotlight placed on him. But to talk about that from a policy and legislative issue, how are you and your colleagues thinking about insurance? How do you understand the impact from an insurance standpoint on how that region can rebuild? How are you thinking about that from a policy standpoint?
Yeah, the insurance market was already very stretched before this happened, and then this was another massive bomb in the market. So everyone knows that there's a problem. We've got increasing. You just went through all the enormous liabilities. So even if it was a perfect regulatory environment, it'd still be challenging to insure everybody in the state because of how many people live in very high fire risk zones and in dangerous places from a fire risk perspective. And then you layer onto that all of the kind of unique challenges of Proposition 103, and which have actually kept insurance rates relatively low compared to most places. But it's got to a point where the delta between it just wasn't making a lot of business sense ultimately with all of the regulation.
But hang on, I'm going to take a little umbrage with that statement.
Okay.
What it's done is put a bunch of people on the FAIR plan, which means it went from a insurance liability to an unfunded public liability, and I'm not sure.
That's largely funded by the insurers.
Kind of.
Yeah.
We'll see. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when
Which
the
is now in
dust
big trouble.
clears. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, you're totally right.
Yeah.
So I was going to critique the system, which I think you'd agree with, that we have one of the big challenges here. We've got a challenge in the sense that we are there's so many layers to this, including an equity layer, which was to say that how fair is it to ask people who don't live in very high fire risk zones to pay more and more for insurance to insure their homes so that other folks can live in more dangerous areas. Should we look at Prop 103 in general? It was put in place, voted by the voters to try to keep the insurance industry in line and keep costs low, but it's straining at the seams. We've had to layer on this FAIR plan as a Band-Aid of sorts, and it's breaking. It's going to be, who knows? It's hard to imagine it surviving in anything close to its current form after this crisis, because so many of those people were on the FAIR plan. So I think everyone knows there's a massive problem. Now, I think the question now is going to come down to what can we do tangibly to help shore up the industry. And it's going to have to be done. There's so much that's going to have to happen. Some of it, of course, is going to have to be based on a rebuild that is really grounded in best practices of fire science. How do we, so are there things we can do to really not just incentivize, but almost force people to rebuild homes that are much less likely to burn? And I think, and communities that are much less likely to burn. Because one thing we found is that you can have the most pristine, well-constructed home yourself, but if the rest of your community isn't rebuilding or managing their properties in a fire-safe way, you still have a relatively high chance of your property burning. So I think that's going to be a big part of this story too, if we're going to keep insurers here doing this rebuild in a way that is really fire smart.
Yeah.
But
much
this
less
is going to
wear, right?
And much less wear, and that's the other question.
Yeah.
As we talk about this housing crisis, one of my challenges with some of the pro-housing thinking has been a reluctance on the part of some of my colleagues to treat different types of development differently. From my perspective, it doesn't make any sense to apply to try to incentivize greater development in the very high fire risk zones. From my perspective, the development that we need to address our housing challenges ought to be more focused on infill, more focused on safer parts of the state. But unfortunately, because of this weird mix of these aggressively pro-housing policies, but the continued NIMBYism and charter politics of California, it's actually led to increased sprawl growth deep into very high fire risk zones, which then raise costs and liabilities and dangers for everyone. It's not just, of course, an insurance cost problem. It's a utilities cost problem. I mean, every fire now, we're going to raise our rates another $5, $10 just to cover the utility liability. It's going to double pretty soon. I mean, Edison rates, I think, if you start to look at the way that the PUC crafts its rate structure. So I think that we've got to start I think shifting our housing focus toward promotion of housing in safer places, and for those projects that are actually going to be moving forward in the very high fire zones, we've got to be so much more conscientious about enforcing fire safety standards. Including good water infrastructure, better utility infrastructure, undergrounding, which is very expensive, but it's very expensive to have a fire too, and those kinds of best practices.
I want to get to questions because I'm sure that obviously we have folks here that would love to ask questions about this rebuilding process. But Chris, I just want to come back to you and see if you might pull the covers back a little bit on what you've found on the impact here to Malibu in light of the PCH closures. Now, again, this is going to be in a more extensive report that we're going
to get that out too, and that's everything. Before I go there and talk about that, I just want to say one thing. I don't want you to think that the FAIR Plan and Prop 130 is all bad. I will tell you this. What's interesting, from my view, is the truth is in the middle. If you go to Texas and Florida, where they don't have anything like the FAIR Plan, there's a real problem with houses going uninsured. There's a real problem with people being forced to sell their homes because of the enormous increase, rapid sudden onset of high costs that they can't afford to pay for. You know, what's interesting is what we need a FAIR Plan, but the FAIR Plan should be there only as a buffer for these extreme times, and then we need to push people back onto private plans. So there is an in-between. I'm not saying go pure laissez-faire here. I just want to be clear on that.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of course, the study for Malibu, and this, again, I think I get a little frustrated because, you know, the process for, everything here is about mitigation. We need to mitigate fires before they happen. We need to mitigate while they're happening. That means having better hardened houses. It means having fire departments that are ready and on site when we have a big wind emergency, not fire engines sitting there uselessly. And then, of course, there's got to be what I call the post-fire cleanup. And yet again, I think there are better ways of doing it. And one of the biggest frustrations has got to be for Malibu, which is, of course, the closure of PCH. I mean, look, Malibu is a sizable community. It's really attached to LA by the PCH. You can go up the well I got down here through the canyon, and that's a beautiful ride. But I got stuck behind two trucks. And it was a long, beautiful ride, okay? And that's the real issue here, right? So clearly, the PCH should be open at some level. You can't just close it down and isolate this community. Now, what we did is we just started trying to get a scale of the numbers here. And what you're talking about, of course, is a community that got hit before the new year with a fire on one side of you.
Right,
and you got hit in January, fire on the other side of you. When we looked through it, about a couple thousand workers, their jobs were destroyed, a couple thousand employees. But then there's 18,000 workers that still are here, that are with these businesses that are here, and they're across, obviously, Pepperdine's the biggest employer of this entire group.
Right.
But you look at the restaurants, you look at the retail, you look at the insurance companies, and they all have been cut off from the rest of LA. And to me, yet again, there's a degree of ham-fistedness there that just seems unnecessary to compound the problems Malibu has already been hit with by just closing it down willy-nilly. Now, I get it. They got trucks. They got to get them out of here, in and out of there. You need to do it in a safe way. But can't they share the road during the day? Can't those trucks move at night? Is this really necessary to do this to the community? Now, to be clear, our data, we're still trying to figure it all out, as the case may be.
Yeah,
and trying to get
and some of it's very hard to get sales tax data
some of it's
back.
looking at sales tax and stuff like that. But to me, it just seems like there's a better way of handling the situation than just closing it down and saying, oh, maybe we'll be open in May, the end of May. So, yeah. But that report will be coming out, like you said. We're in design now on the thing, and it'll give you some sense of the numbers of things. But there's a very real economy out here. That's 18,000 jobs in this community. And of course, let's not remember all the people who live here who can't go anywhere either, Pete.
Right, yeah.
So,
yeah. Let's open it up to questions. We've got a bunch of hands raised. If we can, we got the microphones here. We've got my man Denny down here. We've got my man Dan in the back. Todd? Old people don't. All right, Al. All right, very good, very good.
Thank you. I have a simple question. Now we know that it is really hard redevelopment and fixing LA. What about the building new cities from scratch, modern new cities from scratch, and just connecting all that cities, new and old hubs, with the bullet trains? And why we have to bring everybody to LA or New York or Chicago? Why not building new cities?
Well, that
I was going to say they tried that. Have you ever been to California City?
Well, that is another thing is what we have enough space, yes. It is a policy choice. Also, it's rent, because I guess the rent is the major reason why that the policymakers do not want to build new cities, because they like money and they are part of the community and they are also they have houses.
Yeah, listen,
and lands.
I do hear about this stuff, but I think it was Bill Maher who said that, yeah, building a city here was a terrible idea, but it's here. Look, people don't spontaneously make cities, right? Cities have formed over the centuries.
Brasilia.
Yes.
Well, exactly. There is the occasional success story.
Usually
but
by
for
a
the most
Marxist
part, yeah.
of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
St. Petersburg, I think, was.
Say,
was the built on-
really? Or this is, I had a couple of history buffs up here are going to prove me
Milton
wrong.
Keynes, yeah.
But that being said, look, I hear you, but I think right now we live here, our schools are here, our homes are here, our history's here. I think we got to worry about LA, rightly or wrongly.
Senator Allen, I'd like you to do a favor for me. I lived in the Palisades, and my house was burned. So if you are in any meeting on, rebuilding better, I would like you to bring up these few topics. Number one, clear the brush around homes that are state and federal lands. Clear the brush.
Yeah.
Number two, make sure the hillsides are patrolled. That fire was either caused by a homeless encampment or a teenager setting off explosives and fireworks. Our community has complained about this for years, and we have had no effective management of this teenage issue. And I spoke with one of the law firms a couple days ago to say, did they discover what the cause of the fire was? And they said no. They said the ATF cannot be trusted, so please note that. And that this firework issue is countrywide. There are so many other communities that are still vulnerable, whether it's Malibu or Calabasas or Palm Springs or Brentwood. And if there is no accountability on brush clearance, patrolling the hillsides, managing delinquent teenagers, there are other towns in California that will burn. There is no spontaneous combustion that happens around the winds. There is a human factor in all of these three things.
Yep.
So
Yep.
please
Well-
be sure to mention that it's not just rebuilding better houses.
Totally. You'll be happy to know we just came to this meeting from a meeting at Malibu City Hall where we brought together LA County Fire, Sheriff, the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, the Mountains MRCA, and the City of Malibu, and we were all talking about this question. We just pushed out a lot of money this last week to help with vegetation management projects up and down the state along the lines of what you just described. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that that homeowners actually have not only a right, but indeed arguably a responsibility to handle brush management 200 feet into public land beyond their own properties. And Joe Edmiston, who's the head of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, says that they've been granting blanket permission to people to do that. So there's a certain degree of agency that people have on their own parts to do this brush management themselves within some reasonable strictures. But yeah, we're pushing out money to work on this. There's always financial challenges associated with the kinds of the kind of patrolling all the hillsides at every but of course there are certain times where we know there's a lot more danger, right? You don't need to patrol the hillsides right now for fire risk, but there are certain times of the year where there's a lot more danger. And the sheriff's department was there, and they were talking about new drone and radar technology that they're starting to use to up the public safety enforcement, and I think really focusing those technologies during really high fire risk times in the mountains could be really efficacious.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming, Senator. One of the things that you talked about is kind of the dangers with really emphasizing bringing back a lot of the development in these high fire risk areas. And with the governor suspending CEQA, it seems to be like kind of putting a lot of emphasis back on bringing back a lot of this development. But how can we prioritize that while also making sure that we have developments in safer, less fire-prone areas? Like, is there an appetite for addressing CEQA at a broader level up in Sacramento? Talks about how that could reopen a lot of housing opportunities in places that aren't as fire-prone.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd just say that CEQA applies statewide, and yet some cities are clearly growing at a much faster clip than others, right? And it's not because CEQA doesn't apply in those cities. We've been looking at some of the permitting in the city of Los Angeles. They're just so darn slow, and it has nothing to do with CEQA. They may throw CEQA up as a bloody rag and say, oh, we could get sued. Well, other cities are somehow finding a way around it. So I think it's become a bit of a straw man for cities to use as an excuse when really they're just slow on their permitting processes.
And CEQA doesn't apply to single-family homes.
Well, that's true.
So
That's
keep that in
absolutely
mind. The majority structure we're talking about, CEQA doesn't even apply. So that would be rebuilding some of the commercial zones. That's where CEQA
Or
becomes,
multifamily.
Or multifamily. That's where
Yeah.
it becomes an issue.
Which I assume is what you were really talking about, the multifamily. Yeah. So look, there's some. I will say there's some appetite. There's an interesting idea out there. Chris Ward, my colleague from San Diego, put a bill forward a couple of years ago that would have actually further restricted development in very high fire risk zones in return for a more aggressive streamlining and permitting reform for infill. And the bill ended up kind of running into a couple brick walls. I mean, the truth is the building industry aggressively fights back against any attempts to try to restrict or put restrictions on building in very high fire risk zones. I had a bill, quite frankly, that was trying to address the Paradise issue, where people literally fried to death in their cars because there was one road out of town. Unlike Palisades Drive, which I got to drive down a couple of days after the fire, people literally had ditched their cars on the side of the road. They clearly started running, but at least they could get to the ocean. Paradise, they were literally stuck. And there was just a row of cars. Everyone died in their cars, burned to death, because they couldn't get out. There was one road out of town. I did a bill saying if you're going to do big developments in very high fire risk zones, big developments, you got to have at least a plan for ingress and egress from two different directions. And it was killed by the building industry. And they used the housing affordability crisis as a bludgeon. But of course, from my perspective, it's really silly thinking. So I think we got to push through these special interest positions and on so many levels, including making it easier for more infill in our cities, where I think there's so much room for growth, transit-oriented development, jobs-rich areas, et cetera.
Todd?
Thank you to both panelists. My question is for Senator Allen, and this was sparked, forgive the pun, from something Chris said, that in recent memory, every subsequent year has been the worst fire on record.
Yep.
And yet we don't have a manual, and California seems to be caught flat-footed. We're the fifth largest economy. We have a $322 billion budget. And when we have something like this occur, we're borrowing super scoopers from Canada. So my question is, I think the governor's proposed budget was released right during the first days of the fire. What is the state government doing to take a more strategic approach either in funding CAL FIRE, you mentioned vegetation monies, but what are we doing from a strategic standpoint to make sure that we have the apparatuses that the state needs, that they can be moved throughout the state to respond quickly to fires, stage them at Van Nuys Airport, for example. But how is the state going to address these challenges from a strategic standpoint?
Yeah, so I happen to chair the budget subcommittee that oversees CAL FIRE's budget. So they're going to be buying a lot more equipment. They're going to have a lot more of more planes. We also, of course, so there's an increase in their budget in general because I think there's a recognition of the fact that we need more infrastructure. We also need to get more real about geographic equity. One of the things that I came across through the course of my time on the committee was that they keep saying, oh, well, we give 50% to Southern California and 50% to Northern California. Now, but they do it based on the map of the state. Where really San Francisco is about the middle of the state.
Right.
We all know that population-wise, that's a kind of a false way to think about things. One of my staffers calculated that you could drive to CAL FIRE Southern California within 20 minutes of the state capitol in Sacramento. So we've been working really hard and pounding at CAL FIRE to start redirecting some more of its resources down to Southern California. And I think they will admit that they've been so focused, their whole mindset is about the northern forests, the Sierra, those forests, and they're not as ready. They don't have foresters who know about chaparral. Partly because the whole forester world, all the training centers are up north. There's not a good forestry. We got to have a forestry school here at Pepperdine to train really good foresters.
We have chaparral experts here.
Who understand chaparral and get them involved in the fire conversation. The folks who work on flora, at CAL FIRE are so Northern California dominated, and so part of my job, quite frankly, the last couple months has been just trying to. And they're all use this opportunity to pound away at the geographic inadequacies in the way that they approach their work right now, and they admit to it. I mean, I think this fire has opened their eyes to the inadequacies.
Funny aside, just on that,
Yeah.
and it was Dan Schnur, who teaches here, that taught me this. There's a street in Los Angeles that actually is what bifurcates the state by population.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
the street that runs, and I forget if it's Hill or Flower or one of the numbered streets, but actually half of the California population for the state is above that street and half of it is below. But it just shows geographically how much of the California population.
It can't be Flower because that's north-south.
Right. So it's got to be like 9th or something like that. So, yeah.
Please, yeah.
Oh,
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. Just go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, hi.
wait.
First, I would just like to commend the two of you. Speaking as someone who has no expertise in any of this, I have found this so enlightening and balanced and reasonable. It's just been a good
What about
discussion.
the moderator, Dan?
You wouldn't let me finish. I was just about to say, and you, Pete, you've been asking the right questions. So, but I want to ask about the insurance thing that you talked about. I personally believe that, and this applies to fires in California, applies to floods and hurricanes in Florida and many other places. I really think that the market is particularly well suited to deal with the question of how much housing there should be in dangerous areas. Areas that are dangerous but that are otherwise very desirable because of geography or beauty or whatever. And so it seems to me it's extremely important that the people who live in those areas should pay for it. And so I'm generally very sympathetic to splitting the difference. So I thought that your point, Mr. Thornberg, it was very appealing to say, well, Florida's too hot and California's too cold, and or some other states should go in between. But I believe, and I'm no expert on this either, but I believe in the insurance industry, there's a particular kind of company called reinsurance.
Right.
And that's their whole function, to very rarely have to pay out claims, but when the claims are enormous, they're able to handle it whereas the ordinary insurance company can't. So is there a reason why this problem cannot be dealt with by private reinsurance?
Again, I think you maybe missed my point, which is you're absolutely right that insurance companies should be able to pay for the risk they're taking on. And one of the reasons insurance costs have gone up so much is because the risk of a house being destroyed has gone up, particularly in certain areas. And by the way, the cost of rebuilding a house has gone through the roof. Nobody appreciates, but the cost of building a house has gone up by over 50% in the last 6 years, compared to like 22% for consumer goods. So there has been this big cost. Of course, insurance is going to reflect that. And by the way, for the most part, insurance companies do a pretty darn good job segmenting their insurance base, and even the FAIR plan will segment accordingly depending on some local level of risk, as the case may be. My point is when you have dramatic changes in the market, there needs to be a buffer. But yeah, absolutely, it's at some point in time, you got to pay for the costs of that house. And look, for the record, I just want to be clear on this. If you're paying $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 for insurance, honestly, relative to your property taxes, relative to your mortgage payment, this is couple thousand bucks a month. Actually, believe it or not, that's not that big of a number. It's not the biggest part of running a house. It's part of the cost of owning a house and something we all have to deal with.
We have time for one more question, and Denny, I saw that.
You've talked a lot about helping the people in their homes, but I don't hear as much about the infrastructure, the business infrastructure, as well as the utilities and everything else that the city and state and county are going to have to pay for. What is being done there? Because there are very few articles, and you don't even hear them discussed in any of the...
Senator, maybe you can...
We actually ran through some of the numbers, and one of the reasons is the numbers aren't that high. You're talking a few $1 billion. The cleanup is going to be more expensive than replacing infrastructure. The roads are actually fine, as it turns out, right? None of the roads were destroyed. The big thing is going to be replacing the power lines, and the decision there is, are you going to bury them or are you going to leave them back above ground? Hopefully they will bury them as they need to. There's a huge amount of safety involved with burying the power lines. But that said, I just don't think it's that big of a story. You tell me what you think.
And the gas infrastructure wasn't as impacted as we would have expected. It got totally fried in Paradise, but the Palisades surprisingly well intact. The real kind of story I think associated with utilities is just the liability, right? So the Edison almost certainly was Edison lines that probably caused the Eaton fire, and because of the inverse condemnation doctrine in California, insurance and utility liability law, ultimately, the utility is going to be responsible for the cost, and so that, and what's that going to mean? It's going to mean increased prices for everybody as they continue to pay for the cost of the liability.
If the PUC lets them roll it through, you could make the investors. PG&E went bankrupt, did they not?
They did, but they're the cat that has 9 lives. I mean, no one seems to let them die. And you're right. The PUC it continually rubber stamps these increases, including a recent one from 2017. So it takes a few years for them to do it, but they do it over and over again because their argument is that this is the cost of doing business in California, and if we don't do it, the utilities are going to go bankrupt, and even if they do, we're going to keep them alive.
This is me leaning forward as we're closing this panel.
All right.
Okay, let's have a nice hand for our panel. Thank you.
Commercial.
We are going to take a quick 5-minute break. 5 minutes, and then we'll back for our last conversation with the legendary Chief Bill Bratton.
All right.